want to do in this session is go through the, where's my focus? There it is. We want to go through the very basics initially. So how do you set up your development environment? Then there are some other basics that are very helpful. For example, like how do you authenticate with Office 365, etc. And during the course of this session, we will also create a first Windows 8 app that will then fetch data from Office 365 account. So the session is fairly simple, you could say. We're not doing a lot of fancy things, but there's a lot of basics that really need to be known if you want to create your own Windows 8 application that basically connects to Office 365 and, for example, fetches data from it or does anything else with your Office 365 account. Now focus is lost again. Just a second. Now it's working. About me briefly, I'm living in Singapore. I'm originally from Germany, but I've been here in Singapore for now more than 5 years. All this time I've been working with SharePoint. So basically I've been working with SharePoint now since 2007 and also with version 2007. That's my main expertise, basically SharePoint 2007 and 2010 implementations. On my day job, I'm actually responsible for a rollout of SharePoint within the region Asia Pacific for my company. So my job scope is basically anything that is related to SharePoint, whether it's implementing solutions for the business side, deciding on how to best proceed with something, or basically anything else that is SharePoint related. I'm usually involved with that. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm on Twitter. My handle is @Moddery. My email address is also listed here and also my website. So sometime today or latest by tomorrow, I will also add these slides here and some relevant source code on my website. So after this session, sometime check back on my website and then you can download it from there. So what do you need to get started now with development? It's fairly simple what you need in the end. You don't need a very fancy development machine. You basically just need something where you've got Windows 8 installed. So whether you've got it on your own computer or laptop, or whether you're using a virtual machine on that laptop or somewhere in the cloud, doesn't matter. All you need is a Windows 8 installation. So I'm doing actually my development. I did it all with the Windows 8. I'm not sure which version it was. Basically the latest preview that was published. You can see the link down here. That's also where you can find a download to an ISO file. Same thing for Visual Studio 2012. The good thing is you don't need the fully fledged Visual Studio 2012 Ultimate or anything like that. You can start developing your own apps with just with the Express version, which you can also download from this link here. This is also set up or prepared basically then for Windows 8 development. The last thing that you will need is, of course, an Office 365 account. So if you don't have one yet, go to office365.com, register your own account there, and you can test it for 30 days if wanted. So that's something I've been doing as well, for example, just to do some testing. So I just did some trials while I was doing this development in order to not basically touch my own proper Office 365 account. Okay, so those are the very basics on what you need to get started. As for knowledge, we are talking today about HTML and JavaScript apps. Of course, there's a lot more about Windows 8 applications, so you can also code them in C#, etc. We're doing something that's really not too complicated today. So we focus simply on an out-of-the-box application. A very simple thing that you could do is, for example, set up a Windows 8 project. There are several templates available. If you look under JavaScript, for example, you will find the Metro style apps. There are several templates here, like a blank app, which is really you could say the very basic app that you could start from. There's a grid app, a split app, etc. Our example today, I started to do it with a split app simply because I like that design for my case today. If you want to do something else, that's of course also fine. It's all about, in the end, what you want to present in which way. So a lot of what we are doing today focuses actually not so much on the presentation layer. I'm not covering that at all, but we focus purely on the data layer. So how do we connect to Office 365? How do we get data out of it, etc. When you start your own, or when you create your first Windows 8 project, you will see the following structure here in Visual Studio. So you see a CSS folder, images folder, JS folder, pages folder. It's really nothing fancy. They do what they're saying. So you've got your HTML files in the pages folder. You've got your JavaScript files in the JS folder, images and CSS, then of course respectively. Inside the JS folder, we've got a file called data.js. This file in that sample that I'm using actually already provides some sample data for the application. So if you just go back here, so what you see here on the right side is, for example, the screenshot with some sample data that is inside that data.js file. Of course, once you start developing your own application, you want to show your own data, that's when you start replacing that data inside that data.js file. So what I did is I removed all references for their sample data and then of course connected to Office 365 and fetched my own data. The other thing of course here is the pages folder that also contains some specific HTML pages. Those are then the pages that are used to define the UI of your application. So if you're more interested in that, visit the Microsoft website where you can find more information about Windows 8 development. I'm not going really into detail on all the UI specific information here today. Now let's move on. So let's say we've got a Windows 8 project set up. We've got now, we now want to get some data out of Office 365 or specifically then of course SharePoint Online. Now, how do we do that? First thing, of course, we need to get authenticated. That's already a bit tricky. So you cannot just say connect to my SharePoint site and get some data like you can, for example, more or less easily do with, for example, the client-side object model, etc. What you need to do first, actually, Office 365 is a bit special here. What you need to do here is you need to first basically authenticate with it in a specific way. So it's basically, you could say, some claims authentication that you're doing here. There are some blog posts here about how that can be done. So you see the links here on the right-hand side. So Victor Wieland, Microsoft certified architect and Microsoft certified, Microsoft certified master from Sweden actually did a very good blog post about it. If you want to know more about it, the details and such, please have a look at those blog posts that are listed here on the right-hand side. Victor actually also has some C# code that then can also be used in your own regular C# applications. Now coming back to the basics here, so once you want to start authenticating with Office 365, before you send any query to it, here's what you actually need to do with it. So you need to start getting the whole authentication process here. The first step is you need to get a security token, which you can get from a specific website. So in that case, for example, if you want to log on to Office 365, you usually go to something like portal.microsoft.com or you visit your site, and if you're not authenticated, you get redirected to a specific login site. So what you're doing here is basically you're in a way recreating that experience. So from your application, what you need to do is first you send your username and your password to that Microsoft Online site. As a response, if you're authenticated properly and the website knows who you are, you will receive a security token. So next step is you actually need to connect to SharePoint Online. So you cannot submit any queries yet, so you cannot fetch any data or open a site or so in your code. Next step, you need to tell SharePoint Online, hey, I'm authenticated, please send me some cookies that then really verify who you are. So what you do is you send the security token to SharePoint Online. Again, that's a very specific URL that you need to send it to. And as a result, you will receive 2 cookies. So they're called RTFA and FedAuth. And the next step is then once you're really authenticated here, you've got your security token and then accordingly, of course, also your cookies. Now what you can do is, now you can finally submit your queries, so you can send your request to SharePoint Online, for example, and I don't know, open your team site or send some data to a web service, anything like that. But what you need to do is, of course, you need to include your cookies. If you don't include them in your request, that's when you will get an authentication error, which will say you are not authenticated. So every single request that you now send to SharePoint Online needs to include those cookies. Now, question is, I mentioned just now that Victor Wieland has got some C# code. Next question, is it possible with JavaScript? And this is now when we run into some issues. So I try to do it, but it's just not really possible for the following reason. First thing, JavaScript follows redirect. So when you open or send a request to a specific page, and that page actually redirects then also to somewhere else in the process of receiving that response, JavaScript will follow that redirect and you will not get the proper information that you might need. In our case, if you just go back, this issue actually occurs basically when you send the security token here in step 3. So you send your token over to SharePoint Online, but what SharePoint Online does is it does a brief redirect, and JavaScript follows that, and then suddenly you cannot get the proper authentication cookies anymore. So big problem here, we cannot get the cookies. Next issue, as we're in JavaScript, we're doing some cross-domain posting, which is generally not allowed. So another issue that we have with it. Third issue, even if we could now follow, or if we could avoid following the redirect, we still can't get the cookies in JavaScript because they're set as HTTP only, which means that you cannot actually access from within JavaScript. To summarize all that, basically it means there's no proper way from to authenticate with Office 365 from within regular JavaScript. Now, naturally, we want to do that. We want to achieve it within our Windows 8 HTML and JavaScript apps. So if it weren't possible, then we wouldn't have this session here today. The workaround basically is the following. Within your MetroStar app or your Windows 8 app, what you can do is you can actually create a so-called Windows Runtime component. And as the quote here says, you can use some managed code to create your own Windows Runtime type, package it into a component, and then you can use your component in your own apps with C++, JavaScript, Visual Basic, or C#. Now, what that basically means is what we can do is we can create some code in C#, compile it, and actually then access that code from within our JavaScript code. So that means we can instantiate, you could say, a C# object from within JavaScript and then call the methods of that C# object. So what we can do now is when we want to authenticate with Office 365, what we can do now is we create basically a wrapper in C# that does all the signing in and execution of the queries for us, but we call that code then basically, or that class, from within JavaScript. We'll see that again in a bit more detail in a minute. Now, in case you're now wondering, hey, Victor has got that nice code, you mentioned it's in C#, and why don't I just reuse that one? I'm not using it for the reason that MetroStar apps actually need to follow some specific rules. So the Windows Runtime components must always be using some specific APIs only. If you're not using those APIs, then you can't submit your application to the Windows Store, for example. And I wanted to basically avoid that. I wanted to be able to create a proper Windows 8 application, MetroStar application that could be submitted to the Windows Store. Okay. How do we now create that component that I was talking about? So what we do is we've got our Windows 8 HTML and JavaScript application running. We've got our solution. It includes one project at the moment, so only our, you could say, our JavaScript project. What we do is we add one more project to that solution, a so-called Windows Runtime component project. It's fairly simple. You go to your solution, click Add New Project, select under C# here your Windows Runtime component, enter your desired name, etc. That's it. Next step is you add your C# code to the new project. So you've got your class there, for example, your whatever you may need. And the last step is now, in order to be able to use that C# code or those classes here from within JavaScript, you need to just create a small reference here from the basically to your Windows Runtime component project. So once you click on the JavaScript project, select Add Reference, you can then select other projects from within your solution. And once you confirm that, then you can basically instantiate your other classes and call them methods. Now, that was the theoretical part about how to do that. Now, inside our code, simply what I'm doing now is I've got here my C# class, my helper, basically, that helps me to authenticate. I've got now two asynchronous public methods here, one called sign-in, to which I basically just pass a username, a password, and a host. So username and password are, you could say, your Office 365 login data, and the host is your basically your SharePoint tenant URLs that you want to authenticate against to. I've got the other method here, execute query, which basically is just a helper for me to continue passing those cookies then and to SharePoint Online and to execute my queries that I may have. We'll see that later. We'll focus first on the sign-in. So now inside JavaScript, what I do now is I've got the reference to my C# code, and as you can see here, I just say I create a new variable and instantiate an object here from my predefined C# class. And what I can do now is I create a JavaScript function called sign-in, and within that function I simply call my C# method here, my sign-in method. So you see I passed it the username, the password, and the host, and that's all that there is about it. So it's actually extremely simple to call your C# code from within JavaScript. Now, in case you're wondering why does it actually work, why does the C# code actually, why is it able to really query SharePoint Online, whereas the JavaScript code doesn't? As I mentioned before, there are some issues with JavaScript, like it follows the redirects, and you can't access certain data, like, for example, the cookies from it. It's all possible within C#, of course, so that's why we use that wrapper. You can do nearly everything that you want to with it. As we're using the Windows Runtime Component API, we are actually slightly limited, so it's not the full-fledged .NET API, but it's good enough for our case here. Now, how does that now generally work once we want to do something here? From our JavaScript code, as you just saw, we first create a new helper object. Basically, we instantiate the C# class that we have. Once we've got that helper, we then call the sign-in method from that helper, which of course then in the background starts the whole authentication process with Office 365, which we've seen before. So it fetches the token and the cookie and then returns the cookie. Now I keep that cookie within my helper class here. So any future queries that I have that will then execute any queries to Office 365 will of course pass on that cookie to it. Once that's done, once the C# code has got the cookie, of course, it tells the JavaScript code that it's done, it's completed successfully. Now, what you can do now as the next step, of course, is you tell your C# code, or basically you call your helper method again, saying execute my query, do the following. This C# method, C# code, then of course fetches the data from Office 365 and returns it to your JavaScript code. Now, once you've got that code, then of course it's up to you what you do with it. So I decided in the end to actually pass it within JavaScript, theoretically, you could also parse it within C# if you wanted to. Okay, how do we send queries now to Office 365? What I'm doing here is I'm using the web services. So you might know that there are a lot of web services available within SharePoint Online or generally SharePoint, and at least still in 2010. And all of these web services provide different kinds of methods that we can then use. My favorite is, for example, the getListItems method of the lists web service. Once you call that web service basically and use the getListItems method, you can say, I want to fetch some specific items from a specific list. How you do that, actually, you need to create a SOAP message, as you can see here in the code below. That's a bit tricky then to write all that code, so I've been doing it manually actually. There are possibly better ways to do it, but for the sample app that I created, I was really focusing only on some basic queries that I had here. If you look closely, what I'm doing here in my message, you can see I'm actually calling getListItems, the method that I just mentioned. I say I want to get items from a list called announcements, and for the query I'm not actually specifying anything, so I'm not really filtering by anything or sorting by anything. I just say get me all that data. And I also specify which fields I would like to get returned. So I want to see the title field, the ID, the body, and when that item was created. If you are struggling here with creating your own SOAP messages, one thing that you could do, for example, is if you know or if you do some JavaScript development with SharePoint, you might have heard of the SP Services jQuery library, which basically acts as a wrapper for most of those web service methods. So it also provides some additional very nice functions. Generally, what you can do is, for example, if you've got a query, you could create that query with SP Services. It's really just a few lines of code. And if you install Fiddler, which is some free tool that you can use to monitor your incoming and outgoing traffic, you can actually then see the query that is being sent. So that will help you, for example, to find out what's the SOAP action, what's the SOAP message, etc. Now, our example here, as you can see, I'm using here now my SOAP action, SOAP message, and my SOAP URL where I want to send it to. What I do is, if I want to sign in my JavaScript code, I first call my JavaScript message sign in. And as a following step then, once that's completed, I execute the query and start sending, for example, my queries to SharePoint Online. And as a last step, once the query has succeeded, once I got my results here, I can now pass those results. If you're wondering now, the then function and the done function, they're actually from the Windows JavaScript API. So if you're developing Windows 8 applications, you will see whatever you do is usually asynchronous. So those functions tell you, for example, that at a specific point, basically once the sign-in method has completed asynchronously, then this then method will be executed here. Same thing with the done function. And now, what's the response? What are you getting back from SharePoint Online? What you get is, as you can see here, of course it depends on what you ask for, but what you see here is then is the response from your SOAP message, which is all XML. Within that SOAP message, you've got then the RS data node, which contains several rows, depending on, of course, how much data you fetch. So in my example, I'm selecting or I'm receiving 2 items here. And if you look closely, you will see that each of those rows has got different attributes here. So OWS underscore title, OWS underscore body, and for example, also later here, OWS underscore created. If you remember, that's actually what I was asking here for. So I was asking for the title, ID, body, created. And those are the ones that I received back here. So that's the response we receive, and once we have it, of course, we need to parse it. What it means within our Windows 8 application, then we just start to parse that information, extract the information that we need, and assign it to the proper data structure that we have then in our data.js file. So if you look at the code here, it's fairly simple. I get my XML response, which I just put into a proper XML document. And then I get all the set row elements, which of course are the individual items. And for each item, I then just fetch basically the specific data that I'm interested. So I'm interested in the ID, the title, the created date, and the body. And I assign the values of all those that are received then to my data structure within my data.js file. This is then how it would look like once you run your application. So as you see here on the left-hand side, we've got the different titles of your items that we have. And if you click on one of those items on the right-hand side, you will then see the full message. So it's up to you how you want to design it. So the data and the UI are separate. If you want to change the background color to something else, if you want to add more color to it, if you want to add some logos somewhere. So it's really up to you. If you want to redefine the structure of the data that you show here, so you want to show the date somewhere else or anything like that, of course, it's completely up to you. We'll see that also in the code in a minute again. Now, let me just now switch to Visual Studio so that I can show you the whole project again. So that you see what I've been talking about just now. So that's now really the code that we're going to see. This is now the proper solution that I have. So as you can see, I've got my Windows 8 News App solution. Within it, I've got two projects. The top project, Authentication, is my C# project. The bottom project is my really my proper Windows 8 application that I have here. Let me just open the data.js. Sorry, it's open already. So that's my data.js. So one thing I'm doing here actually, which of course in a proper application you wouldn't do, is I'm defining my login details up here. So I've got my username, my password, and my host that I want to send a response to. And those are then the items that I use to connect to Office 365. So what I do then basically is I create my sign-in function, I create some data around it, and I start to sign in. Let me just check basically, you start here with get news items in my case here. So what I say is at that point, I want to create a new list and I want to get all those items from SharePoint Online. At that point, get news items get executed then, of course. And what I do initially is I start my signing in. So I authenticate with Office 365 here. The next step is then once I'm authenticated, I start executing my query, which we've seen before. I fetch the title, ID, body created, etc. And once that's done here, once that query completed here, and I've received my data back, I will then create my XML document and parse the items. And once I've parsed all the items, I will then actually navigate to a specific page. We'll see the reason for that why. If you now look at the C# code in the background, what I do here is, let's look at the sign-in method first. What I do here is I create an asynchronous task. I first basically get the token from SharePoint Online, as we've seen before. So I send a query to SharePoint Online, say, please send me the token. As part of that, I actually need to create some XML that I send to SharePoint Online. So there's a specific format which you can see here at the bottom. I'm not going into detail here. It really just basically sends a proper message, a SOAP message to that URL, and it includes the username and the password. So it's really just some authentication that you're doing here. Once we've received the response from here, actually receive back, of course, not only the token, but the whole a whole XML document again. So what we do is we do not just take the token and work with it, but we first need to pass that XML document and get the token out of it. So this is what we do basically in this part of the code here. Next step, once we've got the token, as I said, we need to fetch the cookies from SharePoint Online. So there's a specific other URL that we need to send now our token to. It's some fairly simple code again that we're doing. It's nothing fancy. We're really just sending a message to a specific URL and say, here's the token, please send me the cookies. As a response, basically, we will get actually the cookie as part of the header. So we need to pass the header of our query that we send. And once we've got those headers, then you could say this now, we are simply then extracting the proper cookies out of it. Now, what are we now doing with our cookies? I mentioned we need to store them, of course, for any later queries that we have. So I'm really creating proper cookies here and storing them in a proper cookie container. If we now look at the execute query function, you will see this is also nothing fancy. I'm connecting, simply sending my SOAP message that I receive from my JavaScript code here, and my SOAP action to the target URL basically. And as part of that, I'm actually then also sending my cookies, which is done here in that case. So that's why at that point of time, then SharePoint Online knows the query that I'm receiving is from an authenticated user, so I'll execute it then. The query again is also asynchronous as basically everything in Windows 8 apps, because once you execute such a query, of course, it may take a few seconds depending on your connection. And during that execution time, you don't want your application to become unresponsive. So what you do really is then you do it asynchronously. So you wait basically for that, or you don't really wait for that response until the UI becomes responsive again, but your UI is still active, and at some point, and once you get the response back that your query was successful, that's when you will then continue working with it and then updating your UI. So this is all that the execute query does. We fetch the content, so basically we send that query to SharePoint Online, and whatever we get back, we simply pass it back then and send it back to our JavaScript code. That's mostly all that there is to say about this one here. For our JavaScript code, I mean, we just mentioned that we'll pass the data. We've got some data structure actually defined, which we then also display properly in our application. And that's all that there is about it. So this is really just more of a proof of concept application. So that's why I'm not doing anything fancy with the UI at the moment. Now, let's just run it now and see how it actually looks like once that application starts, what it does, and how it's working. So I'm just going to start it now. This is now the splash screen that we just saw. We're now at the welcome screen. It's send out that query to SharePoint Online. It asks for the security token. We get it. It asks for the cookie. We get it. And then it sends that query that we just saw. So it asks our announcements list, hey, I want to see the announcements. Please show them to me. And here we have them actually. This is the real life data. So this is nothing that's prepared in the background, but really that's the updated version of our data. So if I stop that application again and just gonna show you, this is now the site that I was actually connecting to. If I now add a new announcement here just to show you that it's really live data that I'm working with. You see, I've got now 4 announcements. If I now go back to my application, run it again. Again, it signs in, it connects to Office 365, and as you see, we've got now here a news item. So it's actually showing really what we have in Office 365 in our team side. The other thing, of course, is once you create your own application, is that it will also show up here on your Windows 8 welcome screen. So you see, I've been actually testing quite a lot. I've got a lot of applications here. But we've also got then here that app, so I don't need to start it from Visual Studio, but once you start developing, it will also show up here actually on your Windows 8 screen. So once I start it from here, it will do the same thing. It's actually already compiled, so I don't have to really run it from within Visual Studio if I want to see it and demo it. Okay, so that was the live demo. So, as I said before, it's a really simple example that I had here today. It's really more of a proof of concept and not a full complete app. So there are a lot of things that are actually still missing, which I don't have in my code. So, for example, you can actually respond to, let's say, resuming an application or suspending an application, which I don't. So whenever I start my application, it's a brand new start. It always connects again to Office 365. What I also don't do is I don't do any caching of the data. I always fetch the whole data, which may not always decide, of course, in a real life example. I'm doing something very bad as well. I'm not doing any exception handling. Why? Simply because I wanted to actually see all those exceptions that I had once I'm debugging it. I didn't want to basically try to handle them within my code, but I wanted to see them in my Visual Studio environment. Once that application would get upgraded to a proper app that would be on a production environment, of course, you would have to include some exception handling in those, like if the authentication is not successful, for example, my app right now does nothing, it just stops, and yeah, you don't know that nothing's happening. The other issue is, of course, as we've seen before, the login details are stored directly in the app, so there's no way right now to enter them manually. There are, of course, ways how you can do it within Windows 8 applications. I haven't had the time to implement it here yet, but it's not a very complex thing. You can do it more or less easily. The queries that I have are only sent once immediately, so it's not refreshing regularly. There's no code in my proof of concept right now that refreshes the application or fetches the items, let's say, every hour or every 30 minutes. Also something that could be considered for a real-life example. The last thing maybe worth mentioning is for whatever reason, P1 account, so if you're using the small business plan in Office 365, they cause the application to crash right now. So I was desperately trying to fix that before the meeting today, before our session here right now, but I couldn't find basically why it's not working, etc. So if you're using an enterprise account, it's okay. If you're using P1, there still needs to be some more work done. Okay, that's it basically right now from my side already, so it was a bit faster than expected. So now I'm really open for any questions that you may have. Is there anything that you really want to see again, that you want to get clarified, or are there any additional questions that you may have around this?
All right, folks, we can open up for questions now. We have another, in fact, 20 minutes for the next session.